George, before we begin, could you tell us how you found yourself in the Crimea during the Ukrainian phase?
I've always seen the U.S. going in the direction that it went. I was right about it. I wanted a place outside the U.S., a completely different system. I've always been looking for a place to buy in a country that's not connected to the U.S. I was working in Afghanistan, and I took my R&Rs in Ukraine, and really liked Crimea. I met a girl there, got to be real good friends with her, and she helped me get some property there, and ended up getting married and having kids and buying a place that became my home.
So, George, before the interview, you told me that there are these sort of like key lies that keep being spread over and over again about the Crimean referendum, about the Crimea today, and so on and so forth that don't allow you to sleep at night because they're so annoying. Could you tell us some of these?
That it somehow historically belongs to Ukraine, which it doesn't. That there's some sort of Crimean people that were Russianized. That's even in the U.S. Rand McMillan handouts, or I guess that they had some hack writer doing it for them now, so it didn't look like propaganda. But that Russia has always run things through some sort of unofficial channels and mafia. That's not true at all. Just I could go on and on all day what Americans believe about it. That Russia invaded it and took it over, and the referendum was at gunpoint. That's just all absolute false.
Now, George, you were in George, you were in an apartment somewhere in the Crimea, and during the transition period in 2014, weren't you kind of scared or concerned that the people taking over the Crimea might just take over your apartment too and leave you out on the street?
That's a big can of worms. I saw in the U.S. The Western media that they were nationalizing everything after the referendum and taking property away. That's just more Western spin, beyond spin. It's a bald-faced lies. Uh, Ukraine was extremely corrupt as far as the way they administered Crimea. I have a nice flat. It's rather small. I built an addition on it. My wife is a stickler for detail. She had everything done perfectly legal. We have a stack of paperwork thick as a Sears catalog on it. Had all the inspections done, got everything absolutely perfect. The day we got the documents for it and it's finished, cop knocks on the door and told us it was illegal. And we had to pay him $7,000 or else he's going to take us to jail. She happened to be friends with the mayor. He hooked her up with a cop. She wore a wire when he came the next day to collect. And they took him to jail. He bawled like a baby and claimed that his boss made him do it. And the documents division would have had something to do with it as well. Those people are still in charge. I expected in the referendum they would clean it out and get rid of all of them and put Russians in there. That was naive. Same people are still in charge, but they got to be real careful. They're not doing all this blatant illegal stuff anymore. Some of them try to do it like under the table. Right after the referendum, the only thing that happened to us is we got a notice from the same guy, the guy in charge of the building department who gave us our permits. He said, well, our building's illegal now under Russian law, and they're going to send an excavator to tear it off. It's just a threat. I should have ignored it, but we went up there with our documents and, oh, no, these are Ukrainian documents. These aren't any good. I'm not even going to look at these. So they were playing it. The same corrupt people were playing the referendum to get more money out of people. But how they come up with a tax that I had to pay, and that's just the local people. I gave them a few $100 and they said everything's legal again. They'll leave me alone. It's I was naive thinking all the corruption would be squeezed out. Well, ended like in a Stalin-esque way. They'd frog march them out of the offices and put new people in there. That didn't happen. That happened a little bit in Simferopol. They did take some of them to jail, but most of them, I've noticed the style of the Russian Federation is to lean on them and pressure them and make them start doing what's right and slowly get rid of corruption that way. I think if they really hit them hard, these people have a network. I think it's probably Crimea wide, and they could do a lot of damage. They could really gum things up if you start hauling them off to jail. So it's been a very delicate dance. And I think things are pretty freaking clean now. The first few years after the referendum, you still had residual Ukrainian corruption. The bureaucrats used to tell me if I showed them the law, what their Ukrainian law said, and they're refusing to do it unless I give them money, used to just be able to hand it over the table to them. They'd say, "This isn't Kyiv. Kyiv doesn't have any say so here." Well, right after the referendum, they were doing the same thing, saying, "This isn't Moscow. Moscow doesn't have any say so here." They got these little fiefdoms, but they're slowly getting squeezed out and made to comply. And I think it's the project's pretty well along now. I don't see a whole lot of corruption anymore. My last dealings with the bureaucracy, everybody pretty much did what they're supposed to. They've digitized a lot of it, and a lot of it's on camera. They have to act right. The last corruption I encountered is they wouldn't even let me in the door someplace I have to get a document for. And I found out my wife, she knows the area. She said, you have to go around and find out the back channel. You have to find out who to give money to that gets it to them, without getting caught. They have back channel systems for bribery now because they don't want to go to jail. That was a long time ago. That was a few years after the referendum. I think maybe that might have been cleaned up by now.
Now, you mentioned to me off camera some very interesting stories about the U.S. military and their attitudes towards the Crimea. Could you share those with our audience?
I was a military contractor in Afghanistan. And the first thing that happened is I got to spend all day with a 4-star general. We were rolling around all over the camp, stealing concrete barriers from people. We needed lots of them. We're building a Marine camp, and there wasn't enough barriers. So people don't want to turn loose of their barriers, and I wasn't authorized to take them. So this general rolled around with me. We marked them. So we spent the day together. We're making chit chat, and I told him I had a place in Crimea, in Sevastopol, and his ears perked up, like kind of like a dog's do. And he said, "You hang on to that place, son. That's going to be a NATO base someday." He actually said that. That was, I think, probably about 2007. That was long before the referendum. I don't know if that's just his opinion or he had inside information. He was a 4-star general. But then later, I had a web crawler. I subscribed to a service that goes through all the government contracts because I was always looking for something better than KBR. And I'd see the contracts coming up and who's bidding on them, and I could hire in specific areas. And they had contracts coming up in Sevastopol, Ukraine. They were putting out bids to find somebody to renovate the Russian Black Sea Fleet buildings. The U.S. government was asking for bids on that. That's really interesting. They don't own them. They don't have anything to do with it, but they were putting bids out for contract. And this was probably, I know I was still in Afghanistan. I was probably about 2008 or so. And it made it on the web too. People were putting that out and saying, "Look what they're doing." Right after the coup, people pulled that out from the memory hole and showed it on the internet. But I saw it when it came out, the contract for renovating buildings in Sevastopol. They had designs on it. They were planning on taking it away from Russia through this coup and making a NATO base out of it. It's insane that they thought they could do that. I like to think there's a room in the Pentagon somewhere with a model of Sevastopol on it. And in 2014, when they had a referendum, there's a bunch of generals sitting around with their lips sticking out, pouting because they didn't get what they want. There's a lot of sour grapes coming out of that now.
So, George, what has happened in the Crimea since it changed hands? What kind of developments are happening, or is everything basically the same, but with a different flag on the government buildings?
Well, it's been a slow process in some regards. That's just my perception of it. Like I said, I was naive. I thought they would kick out all these corrupt bureaucrats and put some more honest ones in, but that didn't happen. They've been leaning on them. I mean, you don't hand money over the table anymore. They make all kinds of obstructions for you because that's their habit. I don't think they can do anything else. They just can't do their job like they're supposed to. I'm not talking about all of them, just a lot of them. They just refuse to give you the papers that they demand that you have anyway. They'll find all kinds of problems in hopes that you find a back channel and get them some money, because that's what they've always been doing. But they've been leaned on enough where they really can't do that much anymore. And I think things have really been cleaned up in that regard. Now, physically, the place has been transformed. It used to be falling apart. There was no maintenance on anything. The roads were awful. The parks were run down and shaggy, and broken playground equipment everywhere, old wore out Soviet equipment, even equipment in my neighborhood. The buildings were all put up in the late 50s, early 60s. They had wooden playground equipment. It was probably the original stuff, and it was all rotten and falling apart. Well, since the referendum, I guess within a year of the referendum, they started tearing all that stuff out and re-innovating like everything at once. There's a huge park near my house. I mean, it's got to be like 80 acres or so. It's pretty big. They redid the whole place. It took them a year, but it's done. They pulled out all the stops. They did it to the nines. They did a real good job. They made a beautiful, fantastic place out of it. It was broken asphalt and overgrown and just nothing there. It wasn't maintained. The Ukrainian officials got money to maintain things with, but they just stole all of it. They've renovated the schools in my neighborhood. They finished the big park, Akmavat, I think is the name of it. I'm probably not pronouncing it right. And then there's another park on the other side of my neighborhood that they've just finished and opened up again. They renovated this huge park, Park Pobedi, over on the other side of town. They renovated everything, new pavement, new tiles, new benches everywhere, new playground equipment, and it's nice stuff too. It's not plastic crap. Real cutting edge looking playground equipment in some of the places. It was all run down and crappy and kind of dangerous, really. Some of the equipment they had there. It's been a huge difference in the appearance of the place. All new pavements, all new. The first thing they did too is they put new water lines everywhere in the city, including my neighborhood. They dug up the old ones. They put in new lines, new power lines. Paved the roads, nice fresh asphalt everywhere. Put up new signs everywhere. Crosswalks are good. It's pretty nice.
Now, what do people in the West not understand about the situation in the Crimea and about your life there?
Most people in the U.S., and I even know some military officers and educated people that couldn't find it on a map. So there's not a whole lot of hope of knowing about the history of the place. They think it must be dangerous. They get their perception of Russia from action movies where it's all dark, creepy, dissolving, disintegrating Soviet infrastructure with all these criminals running around shooting each other. That's what they think it is. They get it from the freaking movies. And it's clownish, really. It's cartoonish, but that's what they believe, and they're worried about me. Some of my friends and family, they think it's some sort of horrifying, dangerous, dark, dank place. Now that Russia took over, they didn't take over. The people there are Russian, and they voted to rejoin Russia, just like they did in right after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. They had a referendum back then, in 91. They had another one in 94. They were ignored, and finally they got one that took.
What aspects of life in the Crimea are really difficult due to all these crazy sanctions? I mean, can you have a bank account or a bank card? Do you have cell phone service? Is there the internet? What is this all like on a day-to-day basis?
Back when it was under Ukraine control and the U.S. was thinking they were going to get a NATO base there and everything was cool, I could pick up the phone and wire money from my bank account to my wife's in Crimea. I work in the U.S., or I did. I don't think I'm going to do that anymore, but I have been. And then when this all happened, it became impossible. On paper, the sanctions, I read the sanctions, are not difficult to understand. As a exemption, well, it's not an exemption, it's a license. It's called General License Number 6. Private persons can send money to other private persons who aren't specifically on the sanctions list, and my wife isn't on the sanctions list. So I tried it, and the money was confiscated. And they don't tell you that they confiscated it, just disappears. Went out of my account, didn't go into hers. I got nothing. I had to do a couple of days of phone conversations to finally get somebody to, the intermediate bank, which is Citibank, said it was a sanctions violation and confiscated it. And they wouldn't tell me why. They wouldn't talk to me about it. They just said, oh, it's a done deal. They didn't give me any information. I had to contact, I think it's the OSC. I think it's the investigative part of the Treasury. I talked to the Treasury Department, everybody. Nobody told me anything. The I don't remember the acronym. I think it's OFSC. Anyway, the regulating body over banks in America, I got them to say, okay, we found out what happened to your money. They took it as a sanctions violation. We'll do an investigation and see whether it's really a sanctions violation, but it's going to take 6 months. So my money was locked up for 6 months. And I think it was, I was going to send her five grand because it looked like it was perfectly legal, no problem. I'm glad I didn't. I decided to cut that down and do a smaller amount first. I sent her 2 yards, $2,000 they had locked up, and for 6 months. After the investigation, they said, oh, we found it's not a sanctions violation, and they put it back in my account. And in talking to all these people, they were very tight-lipped. They didn't even want to tell me what happened. One guy implied very strongly, I know he probably wasn't supposed to tell me. I'm trying to say, who gets to keep the money? If it's sanctions, does it go to the Treasury Department? That's what most people think. No, it goes to the bank. The bank gets to keep it. That's why they have sanctions officers on the payroll. They go through looking for anything that could possibly be a sanctions violation, and they grab it. And then if you don't know how to get it back, they get to keep it. Profit, cha-ching. That's how the system works. It's just privateering. Most people don't know that. I got my money back eventually, but it was a rather inconvenient thing to happen. And then the next few years I spent when I worked in America, I had to go get cash and carry it home, $100 bills. And another thing a lot of people might not know, if you want to get 20 or $15 or $20,000 in cash, most banks don't have that. They don't have nice, clean, crisp $100 bills either. That's the only kind you can change in my neck of the woods. I've never tried to change them in Moscow. I just assume it's going to be the same. But you have to have a perfect 100. It can't be creased. It can't have a little tear. It can't have the slightest mark on it. They won't take it. So I had to go to banks and said, how many hundreds can I get from you? Nice, clean, new hundreds. And I'm a pain in the ass, I'm clogging things up, but I had to do it. And I'd have to go to 2 or 3 different banks to get enough of them. And I'd have to go through every one with a magnifying glass. I had somebody just go off on me once. He's a military guy too. Really? Really? He's standing behind me saying, really? Are you kidding? Really? He said, go to another window. What the hell is wrong with you? I got to do this. You don't live in my world, man. You don't understand what I got to do every freaking, 3 or 4 months. But anyway, I'd carry all that money home in cash, and then I have to deal with customs. I could go on all day about some of the stuff that I've had happen and had to do, but now it's a little better. Now I've got a way to get around all that. For now, with the present troubles, I think they're probably going to lock things down again and make it worse. But I'm staying here. I'm going to stay here and make money here, which I want to do anyway. The phone service is funky and the banks are funky because it's Crimea and it's sanctioned. The Russian government has made 2 separate systems, so the sanctions don't really bother the mainland. They're isolated to Crimea. Yeah, it makes it a little harder. My chip I have on my phone doesn't work on the mainland, and I get one on the mainland. It doesn't work in Crimea. The bank cards that work in Crimea and the mainland, either one, but your bank is really, really localized, focused. I can't I can't send money from the U.S. to my bank card in Crimea. I have to have a bank card on the mainland in order to transfer money, and the bank cards, those particular bank cards, are tied to your phone and your phone chip. And so if the phones have a disconnect, it makes things difficult. Any interface you have with a bank, your phone rings and you have a code that you put in. Well, it doesn't always work if I'm in Crimea and I'm getting things done, but I'm finding ways around it and just have to deal with it.
So how has the Biden era changed things in the Crimea, or has it not really had much of an effect on anything? Is this new Biden Democrat way of doing things a big deal?
I don't think Biden matters for much of anything except, demoralization of campaign of the American people. I don't think his policies mean anything. Uh, Nobody, I don't think even Trump would normalize relationships or recognize Crimea because all this is coming from the military industrial Congress critter media money carousel. Uh, I could draw diagrams and show you how it works. I know how it works. These people that are making decisions and have power and influence in Washington and determining your foreign policy are getting profits off this chaos and this oppression. And one of the tools that they use for it is refusing to recognize Crimea.
So here's something I've been curious about. How do Crimeans feel about the situation in the Donbass? Because they were sort of spared from all this. They weren't invaded by these neo-Nazi hordes who were torturing locals, putting landmines everywhere, trying to break the will of the people there, banning their language, so on and so forth, right? They also didn't have to experience a civil war. So how do they feel about this dynamic where they were saved, but their neighbors were in some ways kind of left to the dogs?
They know how their government works. As I said, the way they're squeezing the bureaucrats and the oligarchs to play fair and be nice and obey the law, they squeeze real slow and real careful, and they know that. People know it. There's a lot of refugees from Donbass and Crimea. One of her daughter's friends is a lawyer. I think he's from Lugansk. And, they sat down and had tea with us and talked about things. I think both my daughters have music lessons, and their instructor, he's from Donetsk, and he speaks a little English, and they're accepted in Crimea. Everybody knows somebody from the Donbass and Crimea. Everybody knows somebody that came there to get away from it, get away from being shelled all the time. Crimeans support that. I think they're very patient. They know they can't just absorb it or, have a referendum and have it become part of Russia overnight like they did Crimea. They know that it wasn't time for it. Maybe time now, or at least recognize them as independent republics. It stirs up a hornet's nest with the West. What are they going to do? Sanction us? I mean, come on. Crimeans support it big time. They're not disappointed, I don't think. I think they got a little more maturity and realism in their political outlook about how things really work. They've been through it.
So anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video and you like the opinions coming out of my big fat mouth, then join up on my Telegram channel. That's Tim Kirby Hardcore on Telegram. Link, of course, in the description.